What exactly happened between Jungkook and Taehyung today? The question suddenly flooded social media after a brief, but noticeably different moment surfaced. Not a scream, not a cry, not even a big dramatic confession. Precisely because of its simplicity, Jungkook's confession felt much more piercing and left many of the ARMY speechless longer than usual. It all started with Jungkook's words that sounded calm, almost flat, but full of meaning. He did not mention the problem explicitly, nor did he explain the details that fans have been wanting to hear. But the one sentence he delivered to Taehyung sounded like a signal that something had changed. His tone was different, his gaze was not as warm as usual, and the pause he took before speaking was precisely the most powerful hint that this was not an ordinary conversation. Taehyung himself responded in a way that made the atmosphere even quieter. No karakteristic laughter, no balancing jokes. He just smiled a little, then nodded slowly, as if understanding something that no one but the two of them knew. The moment was brief, but enough to spark huge speculation. Is their relationship really at a different point than before? Many fans began to recall small pieces that used to be considered trifles. Less frequent interactions, body language that is no longer as intimate as it used to be, to the way Jungkook calls Taehyung's name that sounds more formal. Now, all of those pieces feel like clues that from the very beginning led to one hard-to-accept conclusion. But what makes the most emotional is not the alleged separation or distance that is created, but Jungkook's honesty that feels very human. He does not blame the situation, does not point to anyone. His confession actually sounds like someone who is trying to be honest with his own feelings, even though he knows that honesty can hurt a lot of expectations. The silence felt even heavier as fans realized one other thing that was hard to ignore. After that moment, Jungkook and Taehyung barely interacted as usual. There were no small gestures that were often caught on camera, no short glances that used to make the ARMY smile involuntarily. All felt more restrained, as if an invisible border had suddenly appeared between them. On the other hand, it was Jungkook's attitude after the confession that made many people feel emotional. He appears more reserved, takes a deep breath more often before speaking, and smiles several times in a way that feels forced. To some fans, the expression looks like someone who has just let go of something very valuable, although it has not completely left. Taehyung was not spared. Despite still appearing professional and warm to fans, there are small moments that make the heart feel tight. His often blank gaze, his smile that appears and then quickly disappears, and his way of looking down for a moment before continuing his activity seemed to be a silent language that did not need an explanation. Speculation has gone wild. Some believe this is just an exaggerated misconception. Others believe that Jungkook is learning honestly about boundaries, about change, about feelings that can no longer be imposed as before. Between the two camps, many of the ARMY chose to remain silent, trying to respect whatever was going on without drawing conclusions too far. For sure, this moment has changed the way many people view their relationships. It is no longer just a story of togetherness that is always warm, but a portrait of two human beings who grow, change, and may have to learn to walk with different rhythms. And precisely therein lies his emotional shock, not in the possibility of an end, but rather in the courage to admit that not everything can remain the same forever. Now, all that remains are unanswered questions and hopes that still hang. Is this just a pause before everything returns to the way it was, or the beginning of a new, quieter chapter? Until that answer came, the one thing that didn't change was the feeling of ARMY who kept waiting, while trying to understand that behind the stage spotlight, Jungkook and Taehyung were still human beings with complex and fragile feelings. Interestingly, in the midst of that restlessness, one small detail appeared that actually made the atmosphere even more mixed. In a separate moment, Jungkook had said a sentence that sounded simple, but if understood more deeply, felt like a continuation of his previous confession. It talks about change, about how one can still care even if one no longer expresses it in the same way. The sentence did not name names, but many felt the direction of the words was clear. The ARMY's reaction was torn between hope and fear. Some see this as a sign of maturity, that any relationship, including a friendship as deep as Jungkook's and Taehyung's, is bound to go through a quiet phase. But there are also those who feel lost, as if the era they have known is slowly fading away without a clear separation. What makes the situation even more emotional is the fact that both Jungkook and Taehyung both chose silence. There was no rebuttal, no clarification, just the activity continued as usual. Their silence spoke louder, as if to say that whatever happened, this was something personal, something that could not be explained with one brief statement. Some fans are beginning to realize that this is perhaps the most painful form of honesty. Not a confession of love or a dramatic breakup, but rather a recognition that feelings can change shape. That closeness does not always have to be shown in the same way as it used to be. And that keeping a distance is sometimes done not because you don't care, but because you care too much. Is their relationship no longer the same? Maybe he did. But does that mean it's over? Not necessarily. Behind all the speculation and mixed emotions, one thing remains clear. The bond that has been built over the years will not simply disappear. He may change shape, become calmer, more mature, and more elusive to the outside eye, and to this day, in the midst of hot news and endless whispers, the ARMY still holds one small hope. That whatever Jungkook and Taehyung are facing, they will live it honestly, with mutual respect, and in the best way for themselves, even though not everyone is ready to accept the change.